And you thought there would be no notes during this outbreak. Please. Nothing can stop the power of add to your notes. Anywho, we're going to get started, guys, on federalism, which is basically just talking about state and local governments. But before we do that, let's have a little bit of a recap. We spent pretty much all of third quarter and the last 3 weeks of second quarter talking about the three major branches in our government. We've studied in detail the concept of checks and balances and how every branch has something that keeps the other one balanced and in check. We now know the names and locations of those branches, like the legislative branch at the Capitol building, the executive branch in the White House, and the Supreme Court with the judicial branch. So, the summary for the past quarter was Washington, D.C., we have three branches of government. We got the legislative branch that makes the laws with Congress. We got the executive branch that enforces the law with the president. We have the judicial branch, which interprets the law with the Supreme Court. Now, with that being said, I have a question for you guys. How many governments does the United States have in total then? Simple answer, right? Well, here's your simple answer. We have one U.S. government, we have 50 state governments, and we have 89,476 local governments, bringing the total to 89,527 total governments in the United States. Not as simple, right? Now, how can this be, Mr. Shoens? We don't have 89,527 presidents. How can there be more than one government in the United States? Well, let's explore this through a visual. Think of it as like a pyramid. And in this pyramid, there's three levels. You got the national at the top, you got the state governments in the middle, and you got the local governments at the bottom. Now, the quintessential piece of a pyramid is the top, where the national government is. It's also the smallest, but it's the way we can recognize that a pyramid is a pyramid, which thusly makes it the most important. Same thing here. The national government is the most important and most powerful of them. Then you got the stuff in the middle, the state governments. Same situation. There's more state governments than national governments, 50 state governments to one national government, but still very, very important because it's not at the bottom, which is where the local governments are. Every city, town, village, metropolis has a local government, which makes them far more numerous than the national or state, but yet they're not as important. So, in summary, we have three levels of government. We have a national government with the president and Congress and the Supreme Court and dealing with militaries, mailing, terrorism, making money, all that different stuff. We have a state government which deals with the stuff on a state basis. If you one day get a driver's license, which is a scary thought, you're going to get a driver's license specifically assigned to that state. So the states deal with stuff like driver's license, dealing with elections because elections happen within the states. You got your Florida state legislatures, you got your Florida state troopers, you got your Florida Department of Education, which is what tells me what to teach you guys. And you got stuff like marriage license and so forth. And finally, you have the level of the local government, which is, as it states, local government, stuff that's dealing with your city, like your city halls, your regular police force, your county schools, your libraries, your bus stops, your recycling, anything on the local level. And that, in case you didn't get the question right on your pre-assessment, which I think two people got right, is the concept of federalism. Federalism is simply a type of government in which the power is divided into a national and other government units, which in our case of federalism, it's a national, and a state, and a local government. So this whole unit, we're going to be talking about the state and local governments in our country. Because in reality, we've only touched 1/3 of the equation when it comes to our country. There's two whole levels that we haven't quite grasped yet. This is a lot quicker than the previous ones because there's not really a whole lot to talk about on the local level, especially. And also, fortunately for us, every one of those levels, just like the national government has a legislative, executive, and judicial, so do the states and local governments. Now, you might see this as something familiar. I would definitely recommend to pause the video at this point and make sure you fill in the blanks. If you haven't looked on the resource tab where documents are at on RenWeb, there is fill in the blank notes. Use them wisely. Okay, I hope you paused at this point. If you haven't, this is your last warning. All right, let's move on. So we had three different governments. We got a national, we got a state, we got a local. My questions now are what keeps these governments in check? Which government has the most power? And which government is the most relevant for my needs, Mr. Shoens? Which one's the most important to me? Because, for example, it makes a whole lot of sense for the national government to deal with fighting wars. Because imagine if a country declared war on the United States, how chaotic would it be if the local governments or the state governments were in charge of rallying the troops? It'd be chaotic. North Dakota might say, yeah, sure. California might say, nah, we're good. Texas might say, bring it on. And Florida might be like, what's a war? It'd be a little chaotic if it was split between different governments. But also on the flip side, let's look at it from the Florida perspective. People in Florida have a lot more better understanding of what their needs are than, say, the people of North Dakota. Now, imagine if North Dakota was making a law about the bison, which would be very important, and they would be very passionate about protecting the bison. But would Florida honestly care, considering we have zero bison? Or if you flip it on the other side, imagine if Florida was making laws to protect the beaches from pollution and old people or something that else that plagues our beaches. You think North Dakota would really care, considering they have zero beaches, which is a sad, sad reality for them? That's why this federalism concept exists, guys. So, that being said, you remember the three branches of government? And you know how we already know that there's three branches of government based upon the Constitution, where you have a legislative branch, which has Congress, you have an executive, has the president, and you have a judicial with the Supreme Court. You probably do know that. I hope you know that. We spent an entire quarter on that. But did you also know that the other two levels, state and local, also have these executive, legislative, and judicial branches? It sounds crazy, but humor me for a minute. Here's all three branches of government on all three levels of government. You have the national level at the top, which has Congress, the president, and the U.S. Supreme Court. On the left being the legislative branch, the president being executive, and the Supreme Court being judicial. But the states also have these three branches of government. The state's legislative branch is a state legislature, so the Florida legislature. The state's executive is the governor, and the state's judicial is a state-run Supreme Court. And your cities also have three branches of government. You have a legislative for a city like the West Palm Beach City Council. You have an executive of West Palm Beach known as the mayor. And you have a judicial of Palm Beach known as the county courts. Now, we're going to go through each one of these one at a time, but let's review right now the national level. This was definitely not a picture of me in D.C. It would make no sense if this was a picture of me in D.C. I did not go there at Christmas time. It looks pretty, though. Anywho, the legislative branch on the national level. So lawmaking on the national level, simply Congress. We talked about how there's a House of Representatives, there's a Senate, all that different stuff. On the national level, Congress takes care of the legislative branch. No need to go any more into it. On the executive on the national level, that would be the President of the United States. They enforce the laws of whatever Congress has made. And the judicial on the national level would be the U.S. Supreme Court. If you remember from the previous unit that we just did, you can appeal your court case all the way to the Supreme Court, and they will deal with it at that point. Now, at this point, there's two things on your notes that you might want to be looking for. One, there's a box here to help you kind of get the idea of these three branches for each level. Make sure you're filling that out. But also there is these, which honestly, if you need these at this point, then I don't know what happened during third quarter. Anywho, that concludes today's slide of PowerPoints, guys. Make sure you get these notes down and be prepared for an assessment. More on that later.